Our layout this evening is Dick Jorgensen up near Minneapolis, has a beautiful HON3 layout. His layout is the Colorado and Rio Grande Southern Railroad. And I've seen this a number of times getting ready for this presentation, and I got to see it some years ago in person. It's well worth watching. So, Dick, are you ready?
Okay, the name of my railroad is Colorado and Rio Grande Southern. The reason I named that is that I model the Colorado and Southern, and I model also the Rio Grande Southern. And so the name just kind of tells what it is. Here's a high-level track plan. As you can see, it's 2 levels. It's in a bedroom. The bedroom is 18 feet wide and 13 feet on the left, 11 feet on the right. I chose a simple track plan because I really didn't want double tracks to make it look like a modern railroad. I wanted to have the intent of trains running through the dramatic mountain scenery. I didn't have railroad operations in mind at the time, but since then I've added a few tracks here and there so that I could have more opportunity for operations. I was influenced by John Allen, Harry Brunk, and Malcolm Furlow. The upper level there in blue depicts scenes from the RGS. The lower level depicts scenes from the CNS, and also a fictitious HON 30 railroad called the Gilpin, James Peak, and Middle Park, and that's in green. The lower left notch there is where ordinarily a closet would be in the bedroom, but since I built that bedroom, I didn't put all the doors and everything in there. A few months ago, someone asked to see the whole room, not just close-ups of the structures and trains. So what I'm going to do is take you a quick tour around the room. I'll show you a high-level view of the entire layout, starting just inside the door on the right and moving to the left. This is the south wall. The tracks are 22 inches apart, and you can easily see the 2 levels there. I do not have any helix connecting the 2. Moving to the left, this is the southeast corner. You can still see it's 2 distinct levels. And by the way, I use Digitrax command control system, and I'm happy with that. Moving further to the left is the southeast corner. You can still see the distinct 2 levels there, but we start to share scenery over on the left side there. Each level there takes advantage of the same scenery. The upper level has the deep ravines, and the lower level then has the high mountain walls. This is half of the east wall where the 2 levels, I'm sorry, this is more of the east wall. This is the northeast corner of the room, and you notice a screwdriver on the lower left. That wasn't intentional in this picture, but I'll explain what that is. Because I have a lot of tough reaches, I have what I call lift outs. And that screwdriver is a way to lift out the styrofoam scenery just underneath it. And then below the styrofoam lift out, I have a 3/4 inch plywood that rests on the benchwork. And so I can stand there and reach the far corners, work on the scenery and details. Here's the north wall. Behind this wall is a bedroom window. But since I'm not using it for the window, I don't have to have an escape. Here's the northwest corner. You can see the top level up there and a little mine. I'll show you the mine in a second. I'll just add that I use code 70 flex track, and I use the fast track jigs to make my turnouts. Here's the west wall, and this is the area of the layout that would be in the closet. And finally, the rest of the west wall. And at the left here, we're back at the door. This is a track plan for the upper level. You can see it's a point to Y to loop. I have 2 yards. I've got a few passing sidings and a few spurs. So we're at the top, starting at the right, just inside the door. This is my town of Ricoh. Obviously, I couldn't do the whole yard because I don't have the room. On the right there, you see the engine house. I built that with design preservation components for the outer walls and Grant Line windows and doors. Everything else on that is scratch. Here you see the engine house, and I've shown the roof there, kind of leaning up. What I did, that's an 1/8 inch plastic, and I did that so that it wouldn't warp because it's such a big roof. Underneath there, I laminated the 2x12 wood sheets to simulate individual boards, and then I added the rafters. You can see the paint there. I painted it kind of a red-orange to match pictures that I saw. And then I used Robert's brick mortar to fill in the mortar cracks. And I think if you see that in person, it works pretty good. On the right side there, you see that it's lighted. I have 17 lights hanging from the beams, LED lights. Here's a couple more views of the engine house. Behind the engine house is this little scene. The larger building are outhouses. Then you got the tool shed. And then you got this fenced in area. I've heard it called a park, a garden, and a playground. I've been interested in anyone who knows really what that was used for, because all the pictures, it looks like there's just weeds on the inside. And a cute fact is that those horizontal beams between the posts were made from narrow gauge rail. This is my rendition of Main Street at Ricoh. The street itself is just about 1.5 inches or 2 inches wide. The building fronts there that you see are flat against the wall. But when I first put those up, I didn't like the look because it didn't have dimension. So I thought to myself, if I ever painted that, I would put sidewalls on there and it give it the dimension that I wanted. So that's exactly what I did. I painted the sidewalls here, here, and here. By the way, can you see that arrow? Anyway, that's okay, thanks. It gives it dimension, and the building fronts and the sidewalls are both flat against the backdrop. Here's the Ricoh water tank. It's a Durango press kit. It's a real nice kit. I'll talk a little bit about the weathering first. I use what I call a layered weathering technique, where I dry brush all the colors. Starting from the back, I would first dry brush the red on, then I'd dry brush the gray, then some browns, and then I'd come back with whites to give it that color. And I did the tank before I did the straps, because the straps would weather differently. The straps in the kit come on a sheet of paper with parallel lines. And so I painted the straps exactly like I would paint the tank, and then I cut them out and glued them on. It has a nice weathered effect. This kit comes with a plastic roof. And it has shingles on there embedded in the plastic. But I covered this roof with Wild West shingles, and I think it looks a lot better than just the plastic roof. Here's my version of the Propatria mill. I built this before Bill Banta had the kit. And you notice the notch in the wall there. That's because our bathroom in the lower level of the house is behind there. And we bought a hot tub that was 8 inches too long for the room. So the railroad room lost out. This is a little transition scene between Ricoh and my version of Lizard Head. You notice the stumps there. They were built with grapevines. Grapevines has a real nice bark texture to them. If you've ever seen them, about every 6 to 8 inches, they have knuckles. And if you cut those knuckles right down the middle, it makes a nice flared stump. And for these, because it's on a hillside, you cut through that knuckle at an angle. It works out pretty good. The Caterpillar on the left is a Rio Grande model, nice model. The one on the right is just a plastic Army Caterpillar, and I was told it's probably a little too new for my scene because I'm trying to model 1941, and it has hydraulics that probably aren't appropriate, but it's a space holder for now. Here's my version of Lizard Head. I used a little modeler's license here where I combined the Lizard Head pass with the Lizard Head stock pins into one scene. The backdrop is painted on a rounded corner, and the snow shed there kind of hides the tail to the Y. It goes back about 10 to 12 inches, and there's enough in there for me to turn around the engine behind the switch. These are all Banta structures. I was fortunate that Banta made a lot of RGS structures, and they're hard to beat. So I'm appreciative of Banta for doing that. On this screen, you probably see a lot of weeds, and nature has a variety of weeds. And I'd like to talk just a minute about the weeds I used for that. The larger weeds I made with baler's twine. I cut about a 1/2 inch of baler's twine, drilled an 1/8 inch hole, filled it with glue, and stuck the baler's twine in there. I let it sit overnight, and then I came back and I could spread out the individual pieces of the twine. And I varied the size and I varied the color. Also in this scene, I used Scenic Express tufts, various sizes, and of course, Woodland Scenic ground foam. And I think varying the colors and varying the sizes really adds to the realism of that. You'll see over on the right side here, you've got the Trout Lake tank and the Goose and Gander from Trout Lake. But I didn't have a lake, and I wanted to model a bunch of little buildings and create a town scene. So instead of Trout Lake, I call this Trout Trail. I'll talk a little more about the buildings in a second. Here's that Trout Lake tank, and you see the plastic roof. And I painstakingly painted all the shingles a variety of browns and grays. And then I decided to put a wash of chalk, gray chalk on there. Well, it kind of obliterated all my paint. So in the future, I plan to put the Wild West shingles on there. So if you were looking at Trout Lake, the scene in real life, from State Highway 145, you'd probably see this mountain scene. And the first time I went by there, I was really struck by the variety of colors in that mountain. And so I had to paint it on here. It makes a real nice backdrop for this scene. Talking about the buildings in that little village, I wanted to get some other buildings other than what was commercially available. And so I just sketched some out. I wanted them on a hillside. And so a lot of these you can see have something to hold them up if they're on a hill. Here's one of them. It's a simple design, but you can see that a lot of these buildings have additional rooms off to the side. Funky smokestacks, that type of thing. All of these buildings are lit from the inside and out. A friend of mine, John Niemeyer, is an expert at that with LED lights. Here's another one, also a simple design. So many of these buildings have little attached rooms. They have railroad ties or something as retaining walls. Wooden fences, probably made from aspen trees, porch lights. Trying to capture the narrow gauge flavor. Here's one that has a much steeper roof with corrugated roofing. And here these three are in the scene. The little structure up front is a Wild West. So moving on to Vance Junction. The coal pockets there is a Crystal River kit. On my railroad, I've got over 2,000 pine trees. And a little tip I learned from Tom McKenzie, when you form your pine tree with the bottle brush method, don't just paint it green. He said paint it brown, sprinkle some real fine sawdust on there, and then spray it again. And what that does, it gives the stems and the trunk and everything a texture. Then set it aside for a day before you put on the ground foam with hairspray. And it makes a nice effect where you can see inside there, you can see the trunk, and it's a different color and it's got a good texture to it. The aspen trees here, most of those aspens are super trees, but I also made a lot of those with dried flowers. Here are the familiar buildings at Vance Junction. The backdrop is a rounded backdrop with the painting on it. And I tried to blend the foreground trees to the background trees to give it better depth. Here's a couple storage buildings at Vance Junction. Originally I had scratch built these, but Banta came out with a kit with a lot of real nice details. So I decided to go with the Banta buildings. I painted those with the same technique of layered dry brushing. Also on this, you can see a little line here in front. That extends all the way around the entire scene. And I can lift out that whole section and work on the workshop with workbench with it. This would be a real hard reach for me to do it on the layout itself. So that's a lift out section. Section house is scratch built. That was prior to Banta. And the station there at Vance Junction, that's a Banta kit. Again, I use the layered dry brushing technique. Here's the north wall, and behind there is the bedroom window. And I just wanted to see the the size of that compared to an HON3 train. Here we are in the next corner. And the mine up there is a Grant Line mine. I actually built the scenery behind that to fit the mine rather than the other way around. I call this Matterhorn because it's just up from Ophir. Yeah, that is not the Matterhorn mine, but for my purposes, it's called Matterhorn. Here we are coming into Ophir and Bridge 45B there. And this whole center section of inside the Ophir loop there is on a hinge. And I can drop that center section down. It's about a 2 foot by 2 foot piece, and I can hook it underneath, then come up from underneath in order to work on the buildings, clean the track, whatever. Here we are at the familiar site of Ophir. The Ophir Depot there is scratch built, but all the other structures are Banta. This is just kind of a cool picture of Mrs. Skillen's store. I put that in there because it has interior detail and lighting. And if you notice, the corrugated roofing is made of paper. It was a company called what's the name of it? Paper Creek. I think they're out of business. But if anyone knows where you can get some of that, it really is convincing for corrugated roofing. Here, number 461 is crossing the Trestle, 45A. And that's a mountain, I can't think of it right now. Mountain Model Works train, really nice detail, good lighting. Here you see the trestle. My trestle here is considerably shorter than the Ophir trestle because of the space I had. It's kind of an S-shaped trestle rather than a long straight trestle. So that kind of wraps up my upper level. And now moving on to the lower level, which is Colorado and Southern. And you see the brown track plan there. That's Colorado and Southern. We'll get to the green track plan in a second. Here you see the roundhouse at Como and the CNS engine number 55. 55 is I can't think of it right now. Anyway, until a few weeks ago, this was pristine black, and I was afraid to weather it, but I finally got around to weathering it. I used scale coat dull finish, and I used scale coat grime. I did some dry brushing with acrylic paints, and then I used chalk. Turned out okay, and so I'm confident enough now to do some of the other engines. Here's the Como Roundhouse, and I have a little story. A month ago, Jim McHenry showed you his layout. Before Jim modeled in S scale, he modeled in HO. And he was selling off some of his cars and equipment, and I bought some cars. I also mentioned that I was interested in the roundhouse. And when I went to pay him, he said, you know, I want this to have a good home, and I want to give it to you. So Jim actually gave me that roundhouse. It was still in the boxes, and the powerhouse in the back is also included. So I just want to mention how generous Jim was. These doors, each individual door has 27 separate pieces of wood. So they were kind of fun to make. The roof on that roundhouse has unique bracing there to correct a problem that the roof was sagging. So I'm showing you the on the left side above, and then on the right side below. I don't know the engineer or the date when that happened. Maybe someone in the audience can tell us. Here's a view of my Como yard. It's drastically condensed again because of the space I had. This is an interesting structure in the Como yard. It's Pat Giboney's car shop. It's based on 4 pictures that I saw in the Klinger books. Here the corrugated roofing is Campbell, and then it's painted and weathered with chalk. Here's another view of the same structure. This is the Como Depot. I built this based on pictures in the Klinger books also. Over time, I'm continuing to add people and details to bring the layout alive. These shingles, these corrugated roofing shingles are paper from Paper Creek. Here's the Pacific Hotel. It burned in 1896, but they rebuilt it very soon after. I scratch built this, and I used Walther's brick sheets. They were really thick, and cutting 50 windows and doors in there was difficult, to say the least. You notice the roof design from the peak down. You notice it flares out at the end. Very interesting design. I built it first without those flares, and of course I had to go back and make it right. Kind of an interesting look there. All of my cars, I like to weather them. I have very few that are unweathered, and I'd like to go through real quickly how I got that effect. This started with a Microtrains reefer right out of the box. Then I dry brushed undercoat light gray. It's a poly scale paint. And I went up and down with the boards. I did that same technique with dirt and US sand, poly scale paints. Did the same thing on the end and the roof. And then I used Rustall and dabbed it on all the metal parts. Same treatment on the roof because it has metal parts also. And if you notice the bottom of the car, it has a heavier treatment of the weathering. And by the way, the Rustall, I let it drip a little bit because as the car would in nature get wet, rain, it would pull some of that rust down. Now, a tin roof weathers differently. According to Harry Brunk, the roof paint would be baked away by the sun almost immediately. And so on the tin roofs, I painted it silver, and then I added colors with more of a dabbing motion than a up and down stroke motion. And very little red paint on the roof walk because that would also be baked. This is just a fictitious spur that I added off the outskirts of Como. And here we are at Forks Creek. These 2 structures were present in the early years of Forks Creek. I'm trying to model 1931. So future plans are to replace these 2 with the more modern buildings at Forks Creek. You'll recognize this as the Central Valley Bridge. I had to add the boardwalk and the anyway. Here, number 6, passenger train is leaving Forks Creek. I scratch built that section house. I had to condense it 10% in order to get it to fit on my layout. I don't think you notice that it's condensed. Here you're looking across Forks Creek at some of the buildings. Again, here you can see the fork in the Clear Creek at Forks Creek. Another view. This high bridge was one of the very first narrow gauge structures that I built. It was part of our modular layout, and when we tore that apart, I saved the bridge and put it into my layout. And another view of that. This little scene was often commented on, but at the time, in many years, it wasn't completed. Here it's more completed. I used Envirotex to drip down from above, and I let it take its normal course. When I did that with one pour, by the way, it almost overflowed in the front. I had duct tape along the fascia. By the way, a tip, if you're going to use Envirotex and you want twigs or whatever in the Envirotex, they float. Wood floats in Envirotex. Here's the scene again with the CNS engine going across the front. Now, earlier I mentioned that there's also a fictitious railroad. It's a 2-foot rather than a 3-foot narrow gauge railroad called the Gilpin, James Peak, and Middle Park. And actually, they had planned to build this layout or railroad, but they never got around to it. If the track plan here, you can see it's in green. Over on the right side here, there's a yard, an interchange with the CNS. It goes down under a tunnel and then comes out on the left side in a mine scene. This is a view of the yard, the interchange, and the switchback. There's four switchbacks, and it goes down into a tunnel on the right to the mine area. Here, little number 8, that's a Mishkal Shea, and it was built by Joe Works. The water tank in the background there is scratch built, but it's almost an exact copy of the Master Creations water tank. I modeled a lot of dead vegetation near the railroad yard in the mine scenes. So here's an example of the pine trees that I spoke to you about without the ground foam added to them. This is just a cool view I thought you'd be interested in. Here, number 7, Climax. It's a flying zoo. It's going down on the switchback and it leads into the mining area. It comes out right here at the bottom of this photo. This mine is similar to the Quartz Hill mine made by Wild West. However, that kit was too large for the footprint that I had there. So I scratch built this kind of based on the same look. This mine is a Grand Central mine by Classic Miniatures. Again, I had to condense this about 10% to get it in there. The ore tipple in the back here is fashioned after the Crystal River tipple that you saw at Vance Junction, but it's much smaller, and the ore is loaded from the top. I tried to create a busy scene with lots of people and activity in this little mine area. The Gilpin ore cars are shapeways, and also the trucks under them is also shapeways. I've used metal wheel sets for all my HON 30 stuff and end scale couplers. Here's a view of the scene from the other end. A lot of this has kind of gold colored dust. I actually got that from a mine or mill site outside of Georgetown many, many years ago. I was told, you know, that might be radioactive. And so I really have covered it with a lot of glue. Hopefully it's not radioactive anymore. So this mine in general has an area with several small bridges, retaining walls, steps, carts, level changes, all to try to create a feel for narrow gauge. So that's the end of my tour of the layout. So any questions from anybody?
Richard, this is Keith Stamper. Can you talk a little bit about your backdrop that you painted, what types of paints you used, and how you got the perspective, etc.? I'm really interested in it. It's a beautiful work.
Well, thank you. Actually, I took lessons to learn how to paint backdrops. And at first, the first backdrops, like the lizard head backdrop, that's painted in oil. But I found that because it was hard to clean brushes and everything with oil, I switched to acrylics. So the majority of those backdrops are painted with acrylics. I copied it just out of books. I just kind of sketched them up there in pencil before I painted them so that I could get the perspective somewhat accurate.
Very, very nice. I've
Thank
attempted to paint my own backdrops using palette knives and those paints you can buy from the Liquitex brand. Some of them look okay to me, and some of them look pretty, for lack of a better term, hokey.
I use the
really
Liquitex.
like what you've done.
I use Liquitex also.
Okay.
Richard, did you paint the backdrops after the scenery was done or prior to?
The entire upper level I painted after the fact, and that was hard because of the long reach. On the lower level there at the Como yards and just around the corner, I painted that all before I put the bench work in. And that was much easier.
You
But with that,
had
I
a
have a
plan.
really good idea of what I wanted in front of it.
Yeah, your backdrop paintings and the way you've got your 3D buildings painted on the wall, it looks quite good. That was on the upper level.
Thank you.
Richard, I must tell you, I also named my layout the Colorado and Rio Grande Southern because I model the Colorado and Southern, but I also like the RGS, and I have an interchange track next to my Como Roundhouse. I model in ON3. So I have a few RGS pieces and a couple of RGS cars that I have traveling across my CNS layout being delivered to my various switching locations. So good name for your layout. I like it.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, that's why I came. I thought to myself, I got to call this something that encompasses the two railroads I like. So yeah, very nice.
Richard, there's a couple
Thanks.
of questions that have come across the chat. One is, where did you get the dried flower material to make the aspen trees?
Just at the craft store. You can get it at Michael's or any of those.
Do you recall what it was called or what to ask for?
Oh boy. Well, one was Caspia. One was boy, that was so long ago because I really prefer the super trees to what I did by myself. But I think as if you go in there and say you just look at it and say, would this look good as a tree if I broke these stems off and glued them or taped them together? With those, what I just would take, let's say 5 or 6 or 7 pieces of flour and hold them together. And then I just simply wrapped masking tape around the stems to create the trunk. And then I'd paint them. So it was very simple at first.
So Dick, here's another question for you about the decoder that you use in your Flying Zoo Climax. What decoder did you use, and is there sound in that engine?
You know, I forgot to mention that. I'm still using cab control in the HON 30, but I think it's Lens. I bought a couple really small decoders from Lens that I intend to put in them.
Okay. And then here's the last question. Is this actually 3 individual unconnected railroads?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Russ, do you see any other questions coming across on the chat for Dick?
No, but I suspect a lot of people would want to comment on how you blended your flat areas, you know, your built up scenery with your backdrops. Very hard to see the transitions in many places.
Thank you. I was trying to do that, and I intend to go back and try to do a better job on some of the areas. But yeah, that's the intent. I think the secret there is try to match the color of your foreground. A lot of it is like woodland scenics, foam, and so on. Trying to match that to the back. It's easier to change the color of your backdrop paint than it is to change the color of the scenery in the front.
Had one theory about the garden there at you had fenced off.
Yeah.
Somebody thought it might be a little graveyard.
And someone is also suggesting you might have been using gypsophilia or baby's breath.
Baby's breath rings a bell, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Dick, thank you again for the effort to put this together. It's a beautiful layout. We've enjoyed seeing it. And we'll look forward to the next time you guys plan something up in Minneapolis for us.
Again, thank you to Johnny Graybill, Al Collins, and of course, Dick Jorgensen and his beautiful layout. Let's see here. Next month, we get to look forward to a visit from George Bogatok from Soundtracks. And then we're going to get a twofer with Pete Leach. Pete is a master model railroader from just north of the Houston, Texas area. And when he relocated to Houston, he had to downsize his railroad into a small 11 by 12 bedroom. And he's going to talk about the whole process of what he had to do there. And then he will talk quite a bit about his ON30 Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington Railway. Then in August, kind of a sneak peek about what's coming up. Bill Meredith from Leadville Shops will be our vendor. Then Mike May and Jerry Cornwell are going to do a presentation, a clinic on layout lighting controls. And then finally, Lex Parker, another of our Canadian friends, is going to present his ON3 DNRGW layout. Well, let's see here. Why am I I'm making that move. A reminder, if any of our participants have photographs that they would like to see shared in our coming attractions portion or our preview portion at the beginning of the show, send those to Dave Adams. You can find his address in the NNG directory. Here's the detail on that. So we need photographs for July. So please scrounge your photo collection for photos of buildings, your layout structures, even prototype stuff if you think it's particularly interesting. Just a reminder of the 41st National Narrow Gauge Convention coming up. Hope everybody can make it down there. And then Dave Adams, are you on the line?
I am, Mark. Thank you. And I would just like to put in a word for another virtual convention. This is the MNRA National. This replaces the face-to-face that could not be held because of uncertainty about COVID at the time. And this will be a Zoom meeting. It will have 3 tracks to it. One will be a Great Hall. From the Great Hall, you can then link to one of 2 clinic tracks. The clinic tracks will be webinars. So the presenter or the panel will be visible in there. You can see them, but you can't see each other in the room. It is just like going to a webinar. In the Great Hall, everybody that's in there will be able to see everybody else. The other thing we'll have off of the Great Hall is up to 100 breakout rooms. And so this will include a breakout room for discussion of narrow gauge topics. For the clinics, if the Q&A runs longer than the time allotted and the two tracks allotted for those, the presenter will then move to a breakout room, and the clinic Q&A can continue in there for up to another hour and a half if need be. So this is something different. If you aren't a skilled Zoom user at the outset of this, you probably will be by the end of it. So there may be a little bit of a learning experience here to be able to bounce from venue to venue with this. But otherwise, we've got over 70 clinics lined up. Right now, there's 40 some odd layout tours. There is a charge for this. It's basically, it runs 5 days and there with over 80 hours of programming. And this is, like I said, it replaces the national event for this year. The one thing I would like to say is go ahead and visit the website, see what's up. And the other item is, if you're wondering about the layouts on tour, is they're all basically all on the layout tour page. And the other thing is the links on that page are live, and they'll go to the videos on YouTube that essentially are the layout tour. So you can get at least that much without having to pay a dime. So anyway, I'll quit, and if you need to attend a convention before Hickory, this may be one to go to.